Shorty SuperCoach, and today we're going to take a look at the rookies that are on offer in SuperCoach 2017. This has been a much requested podcast for a few weeks now, and I haven't done it yet just because I wanted to wait till all the JLT Community Series matches were completed, because then we get a really good reference point to all the rookies, and then I can really take it all in and all the information. And we're only 6 days away from round 1 now, so it's getting very close, and we really got to finalise these rookies, and indirectly these rookie selections will define our structures for 2017. So I think now's the perfect time to do it, barring injury. We've seen what we're going to see. Everyone's available that we know, and it's getting quite interesting now because certain lines offer little, others are quite fruitful in the rookie department. But I've got over about 40 names here down on a piece of paper. I'll sort of take a bit of a look at them a la the JLT wrap-up, so maybe some might get a little bit extra than others, but generally just a line or two on most. Some you'll already know are unavailable and not worth selecting, but I thought I'd cover off on just some of the guys we've talked about over the last week and over the last 2 months. So there are some that are certainly more relevant, but I'll basically run through most of the ones that even your rookie SuperCoach may not be aware that they're out or injured or probably not available for selection and not in the line for a round 1 spot. So I'll certainly try to cover all bases, and I've looked to go below about 15,000. That's sort of where you take that cut-off point, I suppose. And I'll work my way down from the more expensive rookie options and go all the way to your 123, 117, and of course your basement 102 guys. So first off, we'll look at Caleb Marchbank. Now, he is the one exception to that sort of 215, 220 mark. He's priced at 236,100. And I think he warrants discussion because he's had a very good JLT Community Series, scores of around 80 on each occasion, and I think he'll slot into that backline at Carlton quite well and play that sort of role where he is capable of intercepting but also a nice link out of the backline. He is a key post, the former Giant, a highly talented player, but not one of those guys who's absolute shutdown. He's capable of linking up and has a bit of a good footy brain by the looks of it. He's very well at reading the ball and quite a good defender all round. He's long been touted as exactly that, and I think we might see a very impressive season from him. But I probably wouldn't be selecting him personally unless you're a massive fan of Marchbank and that sort of guy fits into your structure. I think he's a very safe option for Carlton's best 22, but at 236k I'd personally be assessing the cheaper options in our back line because there is quite a few in our defence. So I think while you might be sold on him in the best 22, and rightly so, whether he should be in our SuperCoach sides is another question. Andrew McGrath, of course, the number 1 pick, was in a stack of sides as we entered JLT and has exited a stack since. Now, he's priced at 211,000. You can get him as a midfielder and a defender, and a lot of people were right on board McGrath at the start, of course, finding his way to the Bombers, seemingly position available for him, highly talented player, but you've surely got to cross him off your list now. He hasn't impressed through the pre-season. He hasn't really got a stack of game time, and when he hasn't found heaps of the ball. What he's done has been nice, and he looks like a classy player, and no doubt he will be a great player down the track, but I don't think he's really shown the signs of a first-year player that's ready to absolutely explode onto the scene for SuperCoach. And let's be honest, at 211, he really needs to be showing those signs. So I think if you've got McGrath, you've been pretty faithful, but I personally think we've got to put a line through him. Too expensive, and as I've said, the defence has a lot of options. And leading the way for those options has got to be Curtly Hampton. Of course, there was a trio of Keith, Scharenberg and Hampton all around that 160 mark. Hampton is spot on at 160k and is simply a lock for your team. He should be in anyone's team who's taken it seriously. He's gone from strength to strength through the pre-season, got a bit of midfield time, starting to ooze that class that we know he's got. got. As the JLT series matches went on, he really looked to grow with confidence, and by the last game, delivered a fantastic performance where he racked up over 20 touches, was winning it on the contest, has that class and that quick step in the stoppage as well, and he is quite a talented player. So I think in a midfield at the Crows that is lacking a little bit of depth, and is also under some injury heat with the likes of Sloan and a few other guys probably not getting up in the early parts of the season. Brad Crouch is another. I think he'll be in the thick of it, and even if a few of those midfield guys come back, I think we'd nicely see him slot in onto a wing or a half-back flank and rotate in the midfield. So Hampton's a lock, not telling anything you don't know there. His other two mates that were often in a lot of teams, say a month ago, Lockie Keefe at 165, 900, probably got to cross him off the list as well. There's a lot of talk that he could find a key post in the back line or even help out Grundy in the ruck. Neither of those outcomes look likely at all. Hasn't played a stack throughout the JLT Community Series, did play VFL last week, and I think it looks unlikely that he'll find himself in a round one spot for the Pies, so probably put a marker through him. And Scharenberg likewise, 164k. Of course, I did a player profile on him, as I did with Keefe actually, so you can take a look at those for a bit more in depth, but obviously the up-to-date version is what I'm saying right now, and I think both of them have got to be crossed off. A lot of what I talk about in the profile is a few of the possibilities, and now those possibilities have become reality, and we're really seeing that they're probably not in the best 22 at this stage. Of course, Scharenberg has had his troubles with injury in the past, has struggled to really get going this pre-season. I think Buckley would like to play him, but at this stage it doesn't look like he is in their best starting 22. Didn't get a stack of minutes across the whole JLT series, so I would think it's unlikely that we'll see him taking on the Dogs next Friday night. So, of course, he's a very appealing player with his offensive run from the back line and is a former top pick, so the talent is there, and he is on the park, but I would just like to see those teams come out. If he was named, look, he maybe reconsider, but I mean, all we can do is talk about what we're going to have a look at now, and that is suggesting that he probably won't be in that starting 22 for the Pies. Jared Berry, also a man who was quite popular when SuperCoach was first released. Of course, a first-round draft pick going to the Brisbane Lions, big-bodied midfielder. But he is out for, I think, about 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury. That's just a quick example of, perhaps if you've been living under a rock and haven't seen any injury lists or something, I just thought I'd quickly outline that because he has been popular at 139k. In the past, obviously not now, put a line through him if you were to have him. Now, it is also worth outlining, before I get too deep into the podcast, that these selections are also not fully locked until we can see the round one teams. And obviously, we're not privy to that 6 days out, but things can change. There's always guys that we expect to get named that don't. They just fall onto an emergency list. And there's always a few guys that maybe we don't expect to play, but all of a sudden they are picked in the starters. So while we have a pretty good grasp on how the pre-season has gone, the JLT numbers and the reference points we get from that, it is also worth noting that we can't say with full clarity how these selections on our rookie prize players will go, because it is, to an extent, guesswork. It's extreme guesswork in January. In mid-March, it's still a little bit of guesswork, but we have all the other information that we do need. So hence why I waited till this stage to do it, but it gives us the best chance to dissect it and really pull it apart. But having said that, we cannot just say that a guy is an out-and-out lock. We will be able to know most of the locks, but there will be some that we feel quite confident with and do surprise us and get left out and things like that. So always good to run through all the names, which I'll be doing, just to give you a few options if a few surprises do pop up on Wednesday and Thursday night. Nonetheless, I'll get stuck back into it. Mitchell Hibberd is a man who's certainly going to be strongly considered, and I think he should be in most teams. A defender midfielder, 123,900. He plays for North Melbourne, if you're not aware. Of course, there are a couple of Hibberds floating around in the AFL, but Mitch, he'll get plenty of opportunity in North Melbourne midfield this season, and also off half-back, I feel. He's impressed at times times throughout the pre-season, some quality matches, and I think North will certainly take the approach to play their youth, and he'll be a beneficiary of that. Very popular at the moment, and rightly so. That dual position availability also helps his cause. He's as close to his lock as we could like to hope for a player of his age and price. Andy Otten, 123k also. Now, he's been an injury-prone Adelaide defender, played plenty of footy in his time, but can he find his way back to the Crows' best 22? That'll be the question. His JLT performances will suggest that he's very close to that, and looking at a few of the mock 22s that are floating around on certain websites, he seems to fit into most of the Adelaide Crows ones, so I think he should be in your team at this stage. Of course, there are quite a few Adelaide key posts in the back line that are quality and have made quite a strong back six, but I do think that Otten is capable of, playing that third tall and things like that. So he also had some reasonable numbers. You probably wouldn't expect big scores from him, but I think if he does play, we can probably expect you 75 to 80 on most weeks. He seems to be able to get in there and link up, a bit like Marchbank. I think they will probably play similar roles for their respective sides. So, of course, troubled with injury, but at this stage looks like a quality pick. Ed Vickers-Willis, a bit like Hibbert, you can get him 123k. And he's also looked very good. A midfielder, pretty high pick, and it's certainly his time now. I think the Roos will give opportunity to these players, and he should benefit as Hibbert will. I think the likes of Dumont and a few of those other players that are starting to come into the North Melbourne lineup are certainly guys that they're the new blood, the new generation, and I think he'll be a player that is in a lot of back lines. Luke Ryan, 117,000. Of course, for the Dockers, 21-year-old, played fair bit of VFL for Coburg, very impressive VFL player. No JLT games, and I couldn't seem to find him injured anywhere, so I'm not sure exactly what happened. We don't get a stack of WA info over here, but, trawling through the internet, I couldn't see any clear-cut signs that he was injured, but didn't play any pre-season matches, so we've probably got to scratch him off the list. I mean, he was a very popular selection just because he's a mature age recruit to a side that probably needed something like him, but at this stage it doesn't look like he'll be starting round one. Tommy Stewart of the Cats, 117k, also mature age, also a quality VFL player, but unlike Ryan, I think Stewart will certainly play round one. He allows Harry Taylor to play forward, which the Cats coaching staff had made clear that they'll persist with. Of course, Taylor in the forward line hasn't been a success so far, but Stewart has looked very comfortable in the back line. Bit of a shaky start early with the ball, but certainly looks like a good player and a sort of type that will fit in nicely to our back line. So I expect him to debut round one. Just your handy third defender to go alongside the likes of Lonergan and Kolajasny and Mackie. He'll fit in quite nicely there, so certainly a few types that he'll be able to mix with in the Cats back line, so I think he'll be a very handy selection for most Supercoach sides. Another Cat, Zach Guthrie, 102, obviously very cheap. Has looked pretty handy through the pre-season, but I don't see him getting a round one berth. I think a lot of people enjoyed what he produced, and it was quite promising, that's for sure. Pretty small in stature and lacking a bit of meat on the frame, but nonetheless, I think he'll be a player for the future, but I wouldn't have thought he'd find his way in the Cats lineup for round one at this stage. And that probably wraps it up for defenders. Now, there are quite a few there, and that is definitely the area where most of our rookies will come from. So it begs the question what structure you might roll with, and I think most will go with either 3 premiums and roll the rest out with rookies. So I think maybe even 2 premiums and a mid-pricer, whether you classify Zach Tui as a mid-pricer, that sort of type of player, and in that sort of mould, Callum Mills as well. So I think we'll see plenty of rookies on our ground in the back line, and rightly so, because that's where most of them are, and we want to take full advantage of that. Moving on to the midfield, Timmy Taranto, a mid-forward, number 2 pick of the Giants. He's looked fantastic, 207,000 we can get him for, and he's looked very impressive. So obviously he uses talent, a high pick, and Canelio, obviously out for 6 weeks now, gives a little bit of opportunity as well, a bit of extra opportunity. I think he was probably probably in line for a round 1 debut anyway, but he's certainly become extremely popular. For me, he's probably a little bit too expensive, and in such a dynamic midfield at the Giants, I personally won't be going with him. Very expensive. He's had some good scores through JLT, don't get me wrong, but I just think unless worse come to worse and some of our real players in the midfield and our rookies that we thought might play, mind you, there's not a stack that we can absolutely bank on, then you might be forced to go a little bit more expensive to get a Taranto. But I think at this stage, because let's face it, it'll be hot for spots, you know, the likes of Hopper alongside all the other young guns at the Giants and established guns, it's a very deep midfield. So I think it's slightly risky to go with a guy who's 200k plus and hasn't played a game yet, but he has been impressive through the pre-season. So certainly one to consider, and has been a bit of a flavour of the month type of late. Hugh McCluggage, like his teammate Berry, he's out with an ankle injury, 202k, was popular at the start, given a mid-forward option and a top pick, the number 3, but obviously cross him off your list now. He will miss probably 3 to 4 weeks and definitely the first fortnight of the AFL season, so cross him off your list. Ben Ainsworth, also a top pick, also a popular selection early, 198,000, mid-forward, hasn't gotten a stack of game time in the JLT, which suggests he's probably not in the real thick of it in regards to best 22 for the Suns. He's probably gone out of favour a little bit because of that, has shown some reasonable signs, but I think he probably hasn't played enough minutes, and that then says that he's probably not entrenched in the best 22. Could certainly be a chance for those last few positions, maybe a bench spot and rotate on the half forward, of course, but I would have to say at the moment, for edging on 200k, it's probably a no. Will Brodie, 175,800, had a great JLT too, but then only played about 15% of game time in the final one. So again, he's probably a guy that will have to wait for the teams, but could be an option. Very talented player. The Suns will be looking to give a bit of game time to these players. They're really top-end talent. I really like Brodie. Of course, he was figuring in the top spot for the draft at one stage, but then fell back to, what was it, around 7, 8 or 9, somewhere around there, I think, from memory. So, of course, he's a talented player, and I think he will get opportunities. How much, we're just not sure, and I always think we need to be just that, a little bit more sure on some of these top-end rookies, because, you know, you're not just throwing around your 120k. When you're throwing around more than 170, you know, there's 50 to 70k that we can really spend elsewhere. So I think we've got to be really careful with some of those selections now. Jack Bowers, another one, mid-forward, 171k, showed some good signs early in the pre-season, really impressed Rodney Eade, but I would have to say he fits the same bill as Ainsworth and Brodie. They're all sort of vying for those positions alongside what are, you know, it's not a weak Gold Coast Suns midfield anymore. There are quite a few players, particularly with, you know, Barlow and Hanley coming to the club, so I think they won't just be handing out games, so they'll certainly have to earn it, and I think they've played some good games in the JLT to show promise, but haven't locked themselves in and cemented a place as well. Certainly some limited game time in certain patches, so watch out for the teams next week, see where they fit in. That'll probably make your final decision. Also worth noting that a lot of these mid-forward options I'm of course covering in the midfield, so I'll try to outline most of them with their dual position, because of course my forward line list isn't as long, but granted that you can pick them in mid and forward, probably just going to mention them now. Sam Powell-Pepper, lock him in, need I say more? He's an absolute beast of a young man, the Port Adelaide midfielder. He'll play plenty of games this season, and at 135k, mind you, he is an absolute lock, and the saving grace to our midfield, really, because he is pretty much the only one we can absolutely bank on at the moment, and we can bank on very well, because he's looked great, inside ball winner, hard tackler, dumping Shawnee Burgoyne when he likes, so lock him in, looking fantastic. David Myers, he is at 133k, he is also injured now. He was another man that we could probably bank on to be a very good selection, but of course, injury has struck. And we've got to cross him off the list because I don't think he'll be available till about round 6 or 7, and we'll probably have to, get a bit of fitness up, and whether he's even in their best 22, depending how the Bombers are going, is another question. So he might be a nice downgrade at some stage during the mid-season, but certainly not a starter. Jake Barrett at the Lions, 127,900, played every JLT game. Now I think he's probably in the mix as well. He showed some real good signs running through the midfield and off the half-forward flank. Showed really good signs in an intra-club as well. So I reckon he's a smoky chance to get a midfield spot, that's for sure, particularly with someone like Christensen looking like he will miss early parts of the season, and I think he'll probably get an opportunity early. Whether he stays in the side's another question, because the Lions do have quite a quality midfield. He will probably play a bit more time on the half-forward line. Maybe McCluggage out and Berry out might be a little blessing in disguise for Barrett, and he could really get a good block of 4 to 6 games early, and depending on form, could hold his spot. So a good ball winner. He's shown that throughout his time in the NEFL as well. So one to consider there. Nathan Freeman, injury prone as we know, 123k, was a lock if we could see some JLT games from him, and we just didn't. Now, I was reading an injury report. Again, maybe I'm reading in the wrong spots, but I tried Googling for some time, and the best I could get was Nathan Freeman is still in the wilderness in regards to selection for round 1. So I don't know exactly what's wrong with him. We can only presume that it's those hammies again and just the managing of his body. There doesn't seem to be any new injury, but I think it's just management from him, probably just a bit sore. So he's probably got to be unlikely for early stages in the season. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's been ruled out for round 1, so that's probably got to rule him out for our sides. Taya Miles, 123k at the Hawks, been given some backline duties by Clarko, been kicking in at times, which shows they like him as a ball user. He'll be in the mix. I think if he's named, you might consider him, because I think he could produce some consistent scores, but obviously holding your spot in the Hawks lineup is always difficult, so the young man will probably face those challenges as well. Jared Pickett, a mid-forward also at the Blues, 123k, kicked 3 goals in the final JLT match and has probably locked himself into the side. I think the Blues need some goal-scoring power, provides run and dash, a very electric type of player, capable of kicking goals and providing pressure. Of course, a former Giant and top 5 pick. I think he should be in many sides, whether at your forward line or your midfield. I think he'll be in many sides because he'll dash in and out of games. He'll be a little inconsistent, but I think his best footy is really dynamic and exciting, and I think the Blues will be looking to give him every chance to succeed. Harrison Wigg was looking fantastic and actually locked himself into my side. I thought he was definitely a goer for round 1, particularly with injuries and form, but was left out of that final JLT match, of course, in the 25-man squad, but was left out and played no minutes. So that's got to get a little bit of concern, because that final JLT game is generally the best indication to what round 1 will look like, and the fact he wasn't there raises a bit of concern. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was named. Certainly could be a chance to play early matches, so wait and see, because he's the sort of guy who's put together a good apprenticeship in the Sandful and is certainly ready to play AFL. Whether he can get that in round 1, we'll have to wait and see. No doubt he'll play games throughout the season, but we just hope that it's round 1. Where are we going now? Harley Ballick, 123k mid-forward, was in many teams early but played no JLT games. I think just worth outlining. There hasn't been much spoken about him. Also an injury-prone player with that wrist, and he struggled. Doesn't look like playing early games at all. Shai Bolton, mid-forward at the Tigers, 117. Also not much game time throughout the JLT, so that raises a little bit of concern. Looks like they're probably looking more for a Butler or a Castagna in the sort of position he'll be playing. Jack Graham, 117k also. He's struggled with hamstring injuries. Looks like a likely type, but hasn't had a great pre-season. Interrupted with those hammies, and he won't be playing round 1 for the Tigers, which is disappointing. And we'll end on a good note, and perhaps a note that we really needed in the last week, and that's Brandon Parfitt, 117k. He's a mid-forward at the Cats. A lot of Alan Christensen about him. Of course, taken Jimmy Bartell's number 3, and we're dying for midfield options in that rookie price range, and he really presented himself on the weekend. Had a good pre-season to date, but really against the Bombers showed some great signs. A smart player. I think he'll play forward and also roll in the midfield at times, but probably largely he'll be on that half-forward flank and maybe push into the stoppage, having watched a few games with the Cats. But I think he looks like a very good chance for a round one berth. I, being a Cats fan, would say with a fair amount of confidence that he will play. If not, he'll definitely play early. A very good player. Has played senior footy before last year, and I think he'll be a good type to certainly fit into our midfield. We need those sort of clever players forward of centre, and did his chances of round one berth no harm with some good JLT performances. So that wraps up the midfield. Of course, a lot of those are mid-forward options, so you can certainly spread a few of those likely chances of round one berths across your mid and forward line. As far as structure, I think most people, given the lack of real depth through our midfield and these genuine rookie options, there's a few chances and a few guys that look likely, but as I ran through that, the only ones that you could say with genuine assurity that will play are Powell Pepper and probably Pickett, and I'd be pretty confident on Parfitt, but again, I couldn't sit here and tell you he will definitely play. So you probably have to say that Pickett and Powell Pepper are the only ones who will absolutely lock themselves in, and Taranto, although he is over 200k. So I think as far as structure goes, a lot will be looking to have 6 established players, whether they're all premiums or your Dame Beams, O'Meara and Swallow, around your D5, M5 and M6. That'll be the question, and then we'll probably look to have 5 midfield rookies. Now, that might even go down to 4. Powell Pepper may only be the only on-field midfielder at a rookie price. I think that'll be likely, particularly if we struggle to get real options through our midfield. But at this stage, I think probably 4 rookies or 5 looks the most likely. And don't be afraid, if we do not have options, don't be afraid for a guy to miss round one if you're confident in him playing plenty of footy, because often what can happen is we'll have a guy, he's not playing round 1, plays round 3, round 4, debuts round 2 because he has had a good pre-season, and then he's worthless to us then, because he then becomes a downgrade option because you're not going to sideways after that for a rookie, and then he's appreciating just one match behind all the guys who debuted round 1, and of course gives us no value because we can't downgrade to him because we haven't generated enough cash, and then it really hurts. So don't be afraid to maybe one spot in your midfield. If you don't have stacks but you really like Harrison Wigg, or Parfitt isn't named, or Jake Barrett you really like, you think he's going to play soon, that might be a risk that we just have to take, given there is a lack of options. And if he does play round 2 or 3, then look, it's not ideal, but it's good because they're in the side, and then they can start making you cash. Because I think there often is a limited amount of players around the 110 to 140 price range, and not all of them will play round 1. So sometimes it can be difficult, and one of the biggest challenges is finding downgrade options or generating cash after that initial cash cow performance of the first guys from round 1. So just food for thought. I'm not saying do it because we'll have to wait for the round 1 sides, but certainly if you're a big fan of a player and think he'll play, don't be absolutely put off if they're not in round 1 and you feel they're still thoroughly in the mix. So I'll move on to the ruck situation. This one will be quite quick. Of course, Jared Witts is a player that a lot of guys are looking at. I wouldn't really endorse him, to be honest. I think he doesn't really fit the bill in either case, whether it be making money or being a scorer. The fact that Sandilands and Nankervis are looking great, I'd personally rather just fork out a bit more money for them, and I think to put a guy at 211,000 in your R3, I don't really advise that. I think that's probably money spent better, or elsewhere should be spent better. Braden Pruce, 123k, of course he's been relevant to the Goldstein discussion, but he may even be relevant for an R3 if named, which looks likely. And Darcy Cameron at 117k at the Swans, doesn't look likely he'll be named. Of course, a lot of people were hoping he would be, but it doesn't look likely he will, so we can probably cross him off our list also. Moving into the forward line, Will Hoskin Elliott, 213k. He's had a nice pre-season. done some nice things. I don't think he's done enough to really warrant selection. I think he'll probably be in the best 22 for the Pies, certainly thereabouts. But at 213k, I'm not too sure whether that's worth it. It's quite pricey. I don't think he's an absolute lock in the side for the Pies. He's a sort of player who might depend on form, how he goes and how he cements himself into the team. He's more of an impact player, so if you're a massive fan of him, fair enough, but I'd probably be looking at a few guys who are cheaper. Troy Menzel, 183,900. He played all of the JLT 3 matches, and he's the type of player that I think the Crows probably want to be playing good footy alongside Eddie Betts, but he's played some nice footy, not quite really producing the goods consistently. I think he'll be in the mix for the round 1 team, but again, hasn't been talked about much, and probably rightly so. At 180k, sort of a bit like Will Hoskin-Elliott. They're a good chance to play footy, but we need a bit more than just good chance. I think it's a bit risky. If they at 123k, look, they're pretty appealing, and you look to take that risk, but for that extra 80 to 100k, probably a bit too concerning. James Stewart, same deal with him. He's about 170k, played all the matches, highly talented player, looks good, but again, probably better options, and I wouldn't really be condoning him, or considering him, I should say. Ryan Shonmakers, 155k, starting to get a little bit cheaper, so it begins to make you think whether that extra bit of money really is worth it. He probably won't score the house down, but I think he'll play consistent footy for the Hawks. I won't be going with him. I don't think he's a fantastic option, but if you want a safe bet to play footy and just appreciate gradually over time, then Shonmakers is probably a good option for that. Aaron Black, 137,000. Now, he didn't play the final JLT match for the Cats, which I was surprised about. I wouldn't be surprised though if he is named round 1. I do think we need that type of player. Of course, considering the Hawkins and Taylor combination heavily, and it looks like that'll definitely continue on. In fact, the Cats have said that it will. And I think Aaron Black being that third option is something we really need. So I expect him to play round 1, and he may even fall into the mould of, if he doesn't play round 1, you might still go with him because he's going to play footy throughout the season. So I think he's capable of kicking goals. He's a nice kick. He's not going to rack up a lot of the ball, but I think he's a top player Geelong need, and he was purpose recruited. So keep an eye on him. I'll be very interested to see whether he is named, because showed some signs in the JLT, kicked 4 against the Hawks, then backed it up with a not very good game in that second one there. So food for thought. Dan Butler, 123,000. I think we can lock him into our sides. I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen from him. He's got pace, been on the list for a while, looked good in the JLT. I think the Tigers will lock him away and say, yep, you're going to play plenty of footy, and I think we should do likewise. Should be in our teams. Dan Houston, Port Adelaide, 117,000. Upgraded to the senior list. Of course, he was a rookie. He and Eddie upgraded, so that gives us an idea that he's certainly in the mix for senior selection, and I think he's one to keep an eye on. Nicely priced, played some JLT, and I think the fact that he has been upgraded gives us a great indication that he could well debut round 1. Brett Eddie, 102,000, also one of the massive locks for this season. After kicking 5 against the Hawks, his ownership skyrocketed. Most people would have had him already, but he just gets the general feel of most people on board, because it does take a little while for people to really notice who are the top picks. And rounding out with Tim Smith of Melbourne. Now, of course, he's 26 years old, 102k from the Casey Scorpions. A lot of people had him alongside Eddie in our forward lines, but he also hasn't played any JLT, so I don't think he'll be a man who will fit into that Melbourne Best 22. A lot of people are hopeful that he might go alongside Jesse Hogan in the forward line, but doesn't look likely now. But could be an option to be downgraded to during the season, so certainly one to keep an eye out there. But look, that just about wraps it up, I think. A fairly comprehensive coverage, I feel. I know this video was much anticipated by many people, and a lot of guys were hoping that it would be put out pretty soon, and even wondering if it would be at all, but it was always on the way. Of course, the rookies are crucial to our setups, and it really does define our structures, and I think if you're wanting to know where really most of them will be, certainly in the back line where is most. Forward lines is quite appealing as well, and most most people in the forward line will roll with quite a few mid-prices, a la Roughhead, Nankervis, Higgins, Billings, Steele, plenty of options there, Wingard as well. So there's quite a few options. So I think probably maybe 3 to 4 rookies in the forward line might be the way to go. So that probably wraps it up, really. I mean, if you enjoyed this video, certainly let me know. If I left anyone out that you're considering, certainly give me a comment as well. Of course, a lot of names to go through. I like to think I covered off on all the crucial ones and most of the relevant ones, but you might have a sneaky little hidden gem that I've missed, so certainly hit me up on that one and let us know. Subscribe to the channel, of course, that's super important. We're nearly up to 600, which has been a goal. Hoping to get to around the 620 mark by round 1. That'd be super exciting, so stay tuned for more of that. There'll be a few more question or burning question type videos coming up with some of the thought process around the big questions leading into round 1 and some of those big decisions around our side. So I'll look to hone in on a few of those critical areas for our SuperCoach sides and the ones that are racking our brains as we lead into round 1. So super exciting time. We talk a lot about SuperCoach, but it's super exciting just to have footy on the horizon. Super pumped. Hopefully going to get along to the Collingwood Dogs game Friday night. Can't wait for that one. So it should be exciting. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Another lengthy sort of video, but that is the way it goes with these extended videos when you talk about a lot of players. So hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully I can speak as well, and hopefully this can serve you a bit of a purpose over the next week as the round 1 teams come out and a bit of a reference point. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you soon.